The fifth and final part of my Ancient Civilisations series focuses on cultures that the Eurasians and Africans never encountered. A great deal about the Americas before Christopher Columbus remains a mystery, and the loss of that knowledge is a tragedy. Much of the world vanished after Columbus, swept away by disease and subjugation. So thorough was the erasure that within a few generations neither conqueror nor conquered knew that this world had existed. That was a quote from Charles Mann, who wrote a book called 1491, the year prior to the discovery of America by Spain, in which he debunks many myths about the pre-Columbian continents. The first of these is that they were pristine landscapes, untouched by human hands, empty of people, where in fact they supported populations in the tens of millions and created the environments in which they lived. Great ancient forests that the pioneers described as they moved inland from coastal settlements were in reality a novelty that had grown up after the native Homo sapiens were removed from the ecosystem by disease. Christopher Columbus was looking for a new trade route to India for the Spanish, with the knowledge that the earth was a globe, and that one could go west to go east, so to speak. The Silk Road, I talked about in the previous video, had been lost to the Turks, forcing the Europeans to find an ocean route. Prior to his arrival, the continents of Europe and America had never met. Each side found an alien world. The Americas had no horses, cows, sheep, pigs, or chickens, and did not practice livestock agriculture like the Europeans. They did, however, have complex societies and built elaborate cities, such as the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, which was a Native American Venice, only much larger and much cleaner. At this time, there was a huge exchange of culture, technology, wealth, biology, and disease. But this was a terribly one-sided affair, however, and radically altered the ecosystem of the Americas forever. Europe had been built upon a lifestyle in which people lived in close quarters with domesticated animals. This made it easy for many ailments to jump the species barrier, and so rabies, measles, smallpox, and influenza evolved. By contrast, Native Americans grew crops and hunted wild animals, which shielded them from the bacteria and viruses. These diseases came with the Europeans and eliminated between 2/3 and 90% of the population. Only syphilis went the other way. With the drastic reduction in competition, the Europeans were able to make the Americas their own. The civilization known colloquially as the Aztecs was actually comprised of 3 distinct groups, collectively called the Triple Alliance. They are known for their penchant for human sacrifice, but were actually on a par with the Europeans in terms of ceremonial public brutality, if the spectacle of the gallows is considered. The Aztecs were defeated by the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés, who arrived in Mexico in 1519 with a fleet of 11 ships and led an army primarily comprised of rival native factions against the Triple Alliance. Cortés was able to communicate with the Aztecs because he came upon a priest who had escaped captivity with the ability to speak Mayan, and a native woman, Malinche, bilingual in Mayan and Nahuatl, the tongue of the Mexica. Falsely claiming to be an ambassador for his nation, the Aztecs gave Cortés a gift of gold. Thrilled by this, he asked if they had more, for the Europeans suffered from a disease of the heart, cured only by this metal. Because gold had no functional use for the Aztecs, they did not value it and only employed it decoratively. Their free admission that they possessed surplus precious metal in great quantity was a blunder, the consequences of which they could have never known. Part of the reason the Aztecs received Cortés with deference was the myth that an exiled god would one day return from across the eastern sea to claim the throne. He was fulfilling this prophecy. When Cortés arrived on the Mexican coast, his men threatened to mutiny, but Cortés was a man of iron will and killed the ringleader. He also destroyed his ships to narrow the crew's options: conquer or die. Cortés placed the Aztec king under house arrest, and the citizenry rose up, driving the Spanish from Tenochtitlan, but they returned in 1521 with an army of disgruntled subjects who waited for them to die of smallpox and afterwards razed the city, rechristening the spot Mexico City. At the Inca Empire's peak, it contained 10 million subjects, with administrative centres connected by roads, all without the aid of wheels, horses, writing, or iron. Its rulers came from a strictly controlled nobility, whom they believed were born from the sun. Cusco, in modern-day Peru, was their capital, and was the seat of their ruler, whose title was Inca. The Inca called their civilization the Four Quarters, because the empire was divided into north, east, south, and west quadrants, emanating from the capital. Although they did not have writing in our sense, they did have an elaborate system of knotted strings to convey information that allowed them to build up a bureaucracy for taxation purposes. It was an extremely diverse polity, with only 1 in 120 of its people being ethnic Inca, which they dealt with by making their language compulsory across the territory. They did not trade, had no markets, and were not motivated by profit. It was entirely a command economy. 2/3 of the population lived at altitude, so they perfected the art of the terraced farm. In 1524, a smallpox epidemic brought by the Europeans plunged the empire into civil war, which the conquistador Pizarro was able to exploit. Pizarro defeated the empire at Cajamarca in 1532. He captured the last Inca and forced him to pay a ransom of filling 1 room with gold and 2 with silver, which was done, and then he executed him the following year. The Amazon is considered a battleground by environmentalists. It is one of the Earth's most precious natural resources, and has been called the lungs of the world. But recent discoveries have led archaeologists to speculate about whether this rainforest has always been so sparsely populated. In the past, it was thought to be hostile to human habitation because of poor soil quality. Any evidence of civilization is limited because organic matter rots at prodigious rate in the humid heat of the jungle. However, geometric earthenware embankments and trenches have been discovered by LiDAR that suggest an organized society. Artificial soil, known as terra preta, has also been found, suggesting cultivation.